Okay, I believe that we should be live right now. Yes, okay, cool. Welcome everybody. Welcome to this Amplify Catalyst partnership here tonight. My name is Doron Sadja and we have Lucy Railton here. Yeah, this is obviously open for everybody, but Catalyst is an institute here in Berlin for music and actually acting and film and all this stuff. We're located in the Funkhaus here in Berlin, and we've partnered up with Amplify, which is this mentorship program, which is based at ACUD, right?
Yeah.
I don't know the exact connection, but yes, and the idea is, I guess, well, maybe I shouldn't say much about it, and you don't need to say that much about it either, but I guess you could probably say a few words that might be better than me. But yeah, I guess just to get started, my name's Doron. I'm a tutor here in the bachelor's and the master's program. I'm also an artist in my own. I'm a sound and light artist, and I work a lot with multi-channel electronic sound, and I deal a lot with improvisation, performance, installation, all that kind of fun stuff. And yeah, this is Lucy. Thank you for being here with us.
Pleasure. Thank you. Nice to be here on Zoom with you. Shame we couldn't make it in person, but that's life right now.
Yeah.
My name is Lucy Railton. I am a musician making my own music, but I'm also a cellist. I do both those things and many other things, but working in electronic sound production, with field recordings. I work within film, writing for people sometimes, with dance projects, with visual artists. I really am interested in collaboration, and have spent 12, well, I don't know, maybe 12 or 13 years living in London before I moved to Berlin. And that London period was a very different one to the life I have here in Berlin. So there was like a big transition there. But at the moment, I'm making my own music mostly and playing with musicians here in Berlin. And when Corona is not a thing, I'm touring a lot, doing solo concerts and stuff like that, touring music festivals, and yeah, as a cellist or as using electronics or collaborating with other people. And I was mentoring last month. We've just finished.
Okay.
I was one of the mentors for Amplify. I was that mentor for Amplify in what month was that? In April. And Amplify is a mentor and two mentees. And they have many, most months of the year, there are different combinations of people, different mentors and different mentees. And the mentees are, they're normally two, I think, and Berlin-based musicians, music producers, instrumentalists, a range of people who are possibly at earlier stages in their development or of their creative journey, and are looking to develop particular skills. It might be production or working with electronics or field recordings or many like a range of practices, and the mentor's role is just to kind of be a support, give advice, work in the studio with them. You can build on technical skills or conceptual ideas, and it's really led by the mentees. And I had a great time. I think it's been a really brilliant program for people who've been involved over the years, I guess. And yeah, it's in ACUD, the building, but I think at the moment, principally just feel that's where the studio is for Amplify. And we just use studios because there were no live events. So they have a great setup there, and it's really fantastic program. Yeah.
Cool. Is there like a goal for the mentees that they have to produce a certain something, or?
There are, yeah, I think it's varied, but there are in this case, without having live events. Sorry to keep saying the C word, but
Yeah.
there was a goal of some sort to produce some material, and that could be really anything. They also did, it could have been a track or a whole album or a live show or a video or whatever it was that was interesting to the mentees. But also to present a radio show for Reboot FM, which is a Berlin-based or Berlin radio station. Very, very good one. Also working for ACUD. And yeah, they could, that was a live mix. So it could have been a mix or radio show or program or whatever it was. That, yeah, they did two really brilliant things this time around. Yeah, so that's the kind of agenda for it. But otherwise, it's pretty free form, and yeah, the mentees can work at their own pace. There's no real pressure to do anything that isn't kind of naturally that they're not naturally capable of doing. It's like working at your own pace. It's actually like really luxurious in that way to have a month to do what you want to do with as much time as you want in the studio. Yeah,
That's a huge luxury. It's kind of amazing.
yeah, luxury of time.
Yeah, yeah. I know the artist. I've known several artists who've done it, like been the mentors there, and they also just have great artists. I feel like it's such a valuable resource for just a general, like for younger artists, and I think it's also a resource for the older artists who end up mentoring, because I don't know, definitely. You learn a lot through the process of teaching.
100%. Yeah, for sure. And you know, we're all kind of doing similar things, just maybe at different stages. So one of the mentees, Cecilia Tosh, she's making music more in techno, and I really don't make dance music, but I have an interest in it. So it was great to like work creatively with her, because I've actually never done that. I didn't make anything with her, but it was great to see how she worked. And similarly with Sarah, she is a vocalist, like a really good one, like trained, and has a great voice. I don't have a great voice, and but I do use my voice quite a lot. So she kind of helped in a way that there was an exchange. She gave me a singing lesson.
That's awesome.
So because I use my voice, but I have no control with it, and so we spoke a lot about where she's coming from, trying to develop her own practice with just getting away from the voice in a way, or like finding ways of using the voice in her work, but to kind of hide it or to transform it in a way, which is what I do with my cello as well. So we really kind of connected on that level. But then she kind of wanted to bring my voice more to the front. So we had this nice kind of crossover. It was a really nice exchange in that way.
Trading places.
Yeah, and I think that's why Amplify is really successful in that way, because the way that you're matching people who can exchange ideas, but the idea is that resources are provided for that to happen. So that's why we've been really successful at it.
Yeah, it's also so nice to have these kinds of things outside of an academic context. I think that's also kind of liberating.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I never really had, except for training how to play the cello, I never had academic training. So in a way, like I've never come through that path. So yeah. I mean, I know you have a different journey with training or whatever, education in music, and I also work in institutions where, like electroacoustic institutions or places where I'm teaching, and I realized, oh yeah, this is like a very different formula. It's not learned by practice. It's learned by the actual institution. Yeah.
It's interesting. I remember because we had this pre-talk the other day when the term academic came up. I was curious. I wondered if you felt like a little bit allergic to that term. It was like a little bit of a sense, or like a rejection of it. I don't know. Maybe I read into it, but I'm just curious if it's something that you're more hesitant about.
I think I am. I'm sure I am. a bit allergic to the term academic, probably just because of insecurity. I never had that background, so but I find myself in those settings all the time, and I don't have the same I don't have the same educational experience to like stand up a lot of the time within these conversations, but I feel like that's practice, the actual practice of doing the work is where I've really been comfortable. So I think many musicians feel like that as well. We're expected to be able to talk really well about our work, perhaps in an academic way, or at least coming from a sound studies perspective, and not having that training or whatever you want to call it. It's a bit, yeah, I feel I'm easily disorientated, but I'm always in that setting. So so this kind of imposter syndrome situation. But yeah, I wouldn't shun academia, but yeah, just to say my perspective is a little bit.
No, I think it's an interesting topic. Yeah, it stuck out to me because also like I also am trained in a music conservatory, and it was a very non-academic program. And my master's program was also non-academic. And I remember, especially after I graduated from a conservatory, I was like, oof, fuck this stuff. Like academia, no, this is, I never want to have anything to do with this. I really had a strong rejection of it. And also just never feeling like I fit into that kind of stuff. And here I am now, I'm a teacher, and I guess on paper, I can also see how I fit into that territory. But I also still feel like I strongly reject it myself. And it's something within, I think this is a pretty non-academic school. It's still a school, so it's academic, but it's always this hesitancy to fit into this academia, which I think has maybe a bad rap. But really, it's all about education, right? I mean, I guess academia could potentially be whatever we make of academia.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's maybe a hard thing to talk about, but I think it's maybe just useful to acknowledge that we're all on very different levels all the time with everything we're doing, and we often put in situations where we feel like we're supposed to be on the same page, and it's very rarely the case. So then, instead of feeling crushed by being on a different level or something, it's just better to acknowledge a difference of education, and where I maybe don't know my fine details about Stockhausen, I have played a lot of his music, so there's a difference there, and
you may have finer details, just in a different part,
I mean, I'm not really a Stockhausen
yeah.
but as an example, also musicians, instrumentalists, they spend most of their lives, their teenagers, their childhood, and pretty much most of my 20s, just practicing the cello, just playing, just doing that. I mean, that's not all I did in my 20s, but a lot of my time was spent just on the craft, on the technique. So that does take over. If you're on a level where if you're on a professional level, then you can't go deep with the academic or conceptual side of a lot of music when you just have to play it. It'd be great to be able to do it all, but I don't think that's realistic.
Yeah.
Mm.
I think there's also just trying to identify what an academia, I think that also like is such a turnoff, at least for me, is often the language that they use. The academia uses really locks people out. It's kind of set up to make you feel excluded if you're not in the know, or it's not even that you don't know about the stuff. It's just that you don't have the right words to talk about it.
Yeah.
And just like what you're talking about, Stockhausen, like I'm sure you know just as much, if not, you probably know more about Stockhausen than some academics that I know and that I would know, because you have firsthand experience on it. Maybe there's certain information that you may not have, but I don't know. It's just like, just different types of information.
Yeah. It's value in both sides, of course. Yeah. I mean, all the better just to read as much as you can, you know.
Yeah.
Reading constantly. I mean, it's only my fault that I don't know enough of the terminology, you know. I can just just read a bit more.
You know, it's not necessary. If it's not necessary, it's not necessary. It doesn't make you better unless you want it to make, you know, unless you need it or want it. I know my own like pathway into academia. I mean, I know I studied in schools, but the schools were very much practice oriented. It's all about doing rather than reading. And when I moved to Berlin, I started this series called Sound Portraits, which was like very non-academic. It was like a listening session once a month where we'd listen to like Marianne Amiche, you know, Laurie Anderson, Laurie Spiegel, like just different electronic music composers. And I would just kind of present their work a little bit. And it was very non-academic, but like education outside of academia. And that kind of led me to teaching. And that kind of pushed me into like an academic context, but it came from a very just like, I just want us to listen to things in a more like contextualized way together.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And then you're talking about experience, like the experience of listening. It's not what you know about that work or the composer, but the face value of it all, which I feel gets overlooked a lot of the time, you know, because we're influenced by what we know of the composer or the genre or something, and don't actually listen to what it is, or listen to our response to that, to the listening experience, you know.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. We listen with our whole bodies in a way, right? About if a friend tells you something's good, you listen to it differently than if you just found it on the internet, you know, like you listen to it differently about the space you're in or what mood you're in. Like all these things change how we hear. And sometimes
Definitely.
context is really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, that, and then that too, then you can listen to something without any context and not really get it, and then once you understand what it's all about, it makes more sense. So it goes both ways. But I feel I think because I did so much programming, and when I was living in London, I did a music series, a contemporary music series at Cafe Arte, which was like very, very mixed, but within the kind of contemporary classical music, electronic music, improvisation, experimental scene, kind of broad, those broad areas. And I curated and ran a contemporary music festival for a couple of years. And after having done that for so long and just uh, really having like a bit of a blind eye to what it was that was I thought was good or interesting, or music that moved me, or music that I felt was important, a lot of the time those things would get put aside just because you're thinking about prestigious composers or artists who are exciting at the moment, and you're influenced by all kinds of other factors, like, oh well, it's Glenn Branca. I mean, actually Glenn Branca was awesome, okay, but some other kind of big name, you're like, yeah, just book them because they're awesome. But it's just sort of, yeah, you end up just, yeah, like we just said, you end up just like rolling through reputation and names, and then you overlook, just through doing that, you overlook such a lot of amazing work. And that's how people keep getting the same opportunities all the time. So I feel a little more like alert to not following those signals as much as I used to, like the whole names and who's what's what and where they've been and where they've come from kind of stuff. And I think that's like, and if you're mentoring and working with students or people who are at earlier stages of their creativity, it's like that's really, you have to have that. You can't. And the only value is in prestige or in reputation. So that's why it's really useful and great to be working with other people in a mentor kind of way, to be reminded of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really interesting that do you just still do curatorial work, or was it mostly um,
I've stopped
back then?
actually.
Yeah. Are you happy to stop it? Is it like good riddance?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Loads of things. I found yeah, there were lots of problems with the whole thing. Not just having to organize a lot, but um, I don't know, I went off the idea of curating and the idea that you'd have this brilliant picture of how things are going to be and you just make it happen. That's also quite, there's a lot of ego involved there. So I stopped enjoying it when I realized that it can be such a navel gazing experience. But mostly just having to organize. Not organizing is a great thing. That's the best thing about not
Yeah.
being alone anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. When I used to live in New York, I started like a little venue myself, and then I worked at an experimental music venue called Roulette, which is also kind of a center for avant-garde improvised music and avant-garde classical music. And I got to organize festivals there, and I kind of felt like when I moved to Europe, I'm like, maybe I should do this again when I'm here. But then being here has been like such a relief to not think about
Hmm.
curating.
Yeah. Yeah, you can, but I can see why in a city like New York, it's was also so much about the social, like it's fun, right? You get people
Yeah.
together, musicians you love, people you like, you can kind of have all this control over like how things are. It's really, really fun. There's no denying that, especially somewhere like New York and London.
Yeah.
Um, that's kind of probably why I got hooked to it. Um, but when it stops becoming fun, it's really just organizing. And I feel like in Berlin it's a little different. Just the vibe, the idea of getting together and having loads of fun. Will
People
make
don't do that,
it
or
complicating. I don't know. I know it's a thing when you're in the clubbing scene, but like experimental music gigs, if you're talking about that, like Roulette, Cafe Auto, Issue Project Room, these kind of places that are doing this kind of music,
yeah.
we have that here, but in a different way and much smaller scale, and maybe just different energy about it. So I feel like it doesn't have something. I mean, I'm maybe feeling really important Berlin examples that I just don't know about. But my experience is that it's just a slightly different like energy around this kind of music when it comes to concerts. That this maybe more institutionalized, um, like you'll see it in the bigger concert houses. Like what's the Issue Project Room or the Roulette of Berlin?
There's not, right? Not that I know of. The closest thing maybe Ausland or something. I don't know.
So tiny. Yeah, I love Iceland. But
Yeah.
yeah, if that might be you might be right. And there's very small spaces. So like, but then like I've only been here 6 years, so um, I don't want to pretend I know what's going on all over the city. Maybe I'm
Yeah.
missing out on all the fun.
But it is a much smaller city than London or New York. Um, but it does so it, but it, yeah, it does feel like a very different scene here. And I remember actually in the beginning of the talk today, you said that Berlin feels very different for you. Your life here is different and community different. Like I also feel that very strongly from coming from New York, that it's very different. In a way, I felt like the community was a little tighter in New York. Even though New York was such a bigger city, it felt so much more like a stronger community. Berlin is really active. There's a lot of stuff, but somehow there's something where it doesn't feel, at least to me, it doesn't feel like really cohesive as like we're in this together that
Mhm.
it did in New York. I don't know how London felt for you.
Exactly. I feel exactly the same. I feel, yeah, exactly that. There's the cohesion, and this could be because we're newish here. If you think like you moved to London, or I don't know when you moved to New York, but I moved there when I was 18. So you make friends overall that time. Those connections are crucial. Obviously, you're going through your training years together. You're going through being young professionals together. You go through all your stuff together. So like naturally you grow more together than you might if you're an expat in a new city. But I agree, there's like a different, like the way that the music scene in London, I don't know if this is interesting for your listeners. We don't have to talk about it too long. It's kind of a common conversation to compare cities, but
Well, I mean, a lot of the students, they're young, they're just moving to Berlin and starting to get active in the community. So maybe there's
yeah,
things to unpack there,
I
I
don't
think.
know. Yeah, okay. It might be. I don't know if it's yeah. I'll be short. But I feel like cities like New York, in London, there's such a lack, right? Everyone is just struggling. It's just surviving. It's like no one gets paid. There's no funding. There's like very high rents. There's all these kind of disparities between um, input, output, like how much you have to work just to survive, kind of thing. And like that's, I feel like I can only really speak for London, but just the amount of work and collaborations you have to do, it just means that you can't just sit back. You like, if you want to survive or like do anything that you really want to do in a city like that, you have to do everything as well on top of it. So that means I'd be playing with like, not say I didn't want to do these things, but I would play with like such a massive range of people. It might be from pop or um, like Syrian music or film score recording, which I did tons of, and like West African. I played with the kora player for ages, and like because the city's full of um, of musicians coming from all over the world, there's so much going on. You can then do so much, and you can call that work. I mean, in the end, it becomes gigs and it becomes income, but just through that necessity of survival, the energy is that you have to do as much as you possibly can. And that's how I feel most people I know anyway have to operate. So then it means like this crossing over of like everyone's, like you said, we're all like in it together. It's not like, oh well, I can sit back for a year and work on this project. It's like, no, you have to be in the middle of it all to survive. I mean survive in many ways, but like to be doing what you want to be doing, to be like active. It's a bit, I'm trying to say. And I feel like it's not as necessary here to be uh, doing like 5 gigs a week or making sure you're part of tons and tons of projects because of loads of things, economic reasons like lower rent and better funding and more security, and the scenes have seemed to be more segregated for loads of reasons, but like there's no musicians union here, that kind of thing. Like they have their own, everyone has their own initiative. It's like it's a different way of organizing the scene. But I don't know, I'm not an expert, so I shouldn't say much more about it. But I feel like it's the same comparison with New York, that you have to get along with everyone just to get by, and that's a great energy, I think.
Yeah. Everything you're saying about London versus Berlin also resonates in terms of New York to Berlin for me.
Yeah.
It's Berlin has its strengths too. It's amazing that you don't have to hustle as hard. There are more funding opportunities, especially compared to New York and things like, and
Mm.
it is very different. I think, yeah, I'm curious, do you feel like it's changed you artistically to move to Berlin?
Yeah, I think so. For some of those reasons, like there's space and there's time and there are better resources. Um, I now don't have to do some of the work I used to have to do before, so I have more time to work on my own music, and that's the most like profound difference. That's one of the reasons why I moved here, was to be able to do that. And it does sound cliche, like I moved to Berlin to become to be an artist. It does kind of work, and I was lucky. I moved here. My boyfriend was living here already. He had a community, had a studio, which is where I am now. So I had things available as soon as I got here, but it made a huge difference. Like, I wouldn't have had time to make a record if I was still living in London, um, for example. And you
Yeah.
know, you spend 3 hours commuting every day just getting somewhere. So like I feel like this is a great place to be to be an artist of any kind, you know. But I've only lived here and then Boston and in London, so I can't really say I haven't got many examples to go on. Yeah.
It's
But
enough.
why did you come to Berlin?
I mean, essentially the same thing. I
Right.
followed an ex-partner to Sweden from New York, and was not happy in Sweden. And it was kind of like, do I feel defeated and move back to New York? I had heard, I'm like, well, you know, in New York, you need a job to be an artist. The only artist that I knew who survived off their music alone came to Europe all the time.
Right.
And they had old rent apartments in New York. So I was kind
Yeah.
of like, well, you know what, maybe if I'm in Europe, I can survive as an artist without having a day job. And I didn't like Sweden. Nothing against any Swedes out there, but I was not happy I lived in Malmo in the south. Um,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
I was like, Berlin, I knew I liked Berlin. I was a little worried. I know people can get lost in Berlin because there's a lot of drugs, there's a lot of partying, there's all this stuff, which is not my thing anyways. But like, I also knew at least the cliche about Berlin coming from New York. New Yorkers like to trash talk any other city. But they're like, Berlin is easy. Life is too easy. You get lazy. And so I felt very conscious moving here to be like, yeah, I don't want to be lazy here. I want to be just as active as I was in New York.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Completely relate to that. I also used to really not like Berlin, being a Londoner. I thought it was a place where everyone went just to retire,
yeah.
basically. But and I'm sure that happens. But I don't know.
So
I
are we
think
retired now?
I definitely not. I feel extremely busy.
Yeah.
There's a fine line, of course. I think, you know, it's like you can obviously you can get by here, and it's people seem to be quite well supported. So sure, you can afford to relax a bit more.
Yeah.
But
There's
really, you know, we're in the middle of, well, not exactly, but we're in Europe. We can go anywhere we want, and that's actually even the difference from being in the UK, just not having to fly everywhere from an island has made a really big difference. I never thought about that, but the fact I can get on the train and go to Vienna or somewhere else is, yeah, it's an obvious thing to say, but I didn't realize that would have an impact on me as much as it has.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, coming from America, that's a huge difference that you can
Yeah,
travel for concerts you can go so many different cities, and they're all either by train or a very short flight. And that's not the case in the States.
yeah,
So in terms of being a musician, it's like night and day. It's so much better
yeah,
here. Berlin is so central and it just gives you so much opportunity.
yeah. Do you think that's why? Do you think because there is, like, if you're in somewhere like the States, you can't, you have to all you said it, you'd be more cohesive with each other because you can't just quickly fly to LA. But I feel like here, in a way, like it's very simple to like take a trip to another country, and you don't really have to rely on Berlin itself. You can spread out much more thinly, and I feel like that's partly why the city can feel a little like disconnected, because we already have ties all over Europe. That's how I live anyway here.
Yeah, I mean, people are constantly traveling. Berlin musicians are always out of town. It's the beauty of living in Berlin, but I think that maybe community-wise, it can change things. I see
Mhm.
on the chat, Anton also said, it's just a different scale. There are new things always popping up, like unheimlich, unheimlich. Um, yeah, scale is another thing, right? London is what, 20 million people metropolitan?
No, well, not 20, maybe 11.
Okay.
Guessing, not 20. Yeah, sure it's a scale thing, but
Yeah,
not the only reason. Yeah. Is that the only question we've had so far? We must
that's
be
the only question so far. But
leaving
yeah,
really.
feel free to make questions. All you people out there, we are watching. Um,
Let's stop comparing cities.
so what are you working on at the moment?
Right now, I mean, I'm always doing many things at the same time.
Yeah.
So I have to think, what am I working on right now? I'm actually finishing off projects before I start another quite big new one that will take up, which should take up a lot of this year. But right now I'm finishing a record which is cello and organ,
Mm.
like played by somebody else, the organ. I'm not playing both instruments. And that's like an old record that we recorded in Iceland in 2017. But I just had not got around to working on it yet until lockdown. So
Mhm.
it's one of these like hard drive projects that I've been wanting to do for a long time, but hadn't had the space to do it. And it's like the most musical, like just me playing cello and improvising project that I've done for a long time.
Yeah.
But working with a keyboard, like an organist, but also a keyboard player. He plays piano and other synths and things. Who I've worked with for about 15 years now. He's called Kit Downs,
Okay.
and he's really a jazz musician. He's like mostly working in jazz. But we play all kinds of things together, loads of different projects, and he's amazing. And we just basically went to Iceland um, to record an album, and we went to a church there, and we just sat down for like a day, and I edited those recordings. It's very unlike the stuff I've been doing in the last couple of years, but it's kind of an example of how I'm not just making electronic music. And I guess the records that I've made have been in that sphere. Um, but that is just one side of what I'm doing. I'm like really like 70% of my existence is being a cellist. If I think about my time division and what I've done in the last 15 years, it's like being a cellist. So it's like this record actually is nice because I'm coming back to what it is that I feel I'm most connected to, which is the instrument. Um, but it's been good to not be working with all this stuff for a bit, because that's like another, the reason why I was doing the records that have come out in the last few years have been like I've been an act of going away from being a cellist. So I put the cello down for a while and just worked on like composition in a studio context. And now I feel like I'm coming a bit back to the cello again. But I'm also balancing with lots of other things. But right now I'm working on that record, and it'll be out in July. Um, that's one thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I often find with myself anyways, that I have these like cycles of how I do things. It's like sometimes I leave something that was very essential to me for years, and then all of a sudden come back and you're like, oh, this is what I was doing in
Yeah.
like so long ago. This is like or like these things are cyclical, and things
Yeah.
come back often.
Yeah. And it's nice to to like maybe when you're younger, or maybe it still happens now, but you listen to something you did 4 years ago and you're like, oh, that sounds like 4 years ago. Like, because there's so much that's happened during that time, or you've learned, this learning curve is so steep earlier on, maybe. But I feel like now, so I was 29 when I did that recording, and I feel like I could have made it last week. It's like, so it's nice to feel like actually things have begun to be grounded. Like I feel like the like my voice, or whatever you want to say, is like that's become stabilized in some ways. And so that's why, looking back at some projects recently, it's been really cool to realize that that's like been like you said, just coming back to stuff, and either being like, oh wow, a lot has changed, or to be like, well, that's what I like doing because I've been doing that for the last 6 years. It's
Yeah.
like you discover something. Yeah.
right? You were honest with you were doing what was honestly you, and you still are. And something it's nice to have that like affirmation.
Yeah, so
You don't want to be on loop, but it is nice to be like, yeah, this is my identity.
mhm, yeah,
Yeah.
identity, exactly. We I worked with a writer on this record to kind of contextualize it a little bit, because I'm not a writer, and she's really brilliant.
Hmm.
She's an old friend of mine, Sophie Fetokakis, and we were kind of talking about the way that, like, we have, especially with instrumentalists, we have this idea that when you're doing something, like performing, which in a way that's inspired, which is how this record really came about. We were in Iceland, we were just like, let's play for like 5 hours, and then we worked with that material. So in a way I was like, wow, this is like pure inspiration. That's really how it came about. There was no like writing things down or like planning in advance. It was really just in the moment, as you do with improvising. Also,
Yeah.
Kate and I we have a great collaboration. We know each other really well, and musically we connect really well. But so that's why the kind of the recording process was in a way successful, musically at least, or at least we loved the material. But I kind of had the idea that we were in some kind of inspired place where like something comes in and comes out, and kind of whatever this is, and working with Sophie, she was like, yeah, but this is like what we're taught when we're trained, or in many other practices, the idea that something transcends. And I was like, yes, that's it. But it was like, but that's really problematic, because that's what we've been taught, like to think about the sublime, and like especially to thinking about religious music, that none of this, whatever it is that's going on when we're inspired, none of that really belongs to us. It belongs to the composer, or God, or whatever it's about. Um, and that's like deep in my training for sure. It's not you, it's Beethoven. It's not you, it's the faith. And so you then become completely detached with whatever it is that you're experiencing when you're performing or when you're working on material. And she was like, Sophie was like, this is this is not like going in and out. It's not going up to the gods or whatever it is that we think of as this like euphoria or experience or inspiration. It's like the other way around. It's like grounded. It's like going in and down, and it's like sedimenting. And like, this is a term that's not mine at all, but it's Ben Spatz, who's a writer, who she introduced me to. This idea that of sedimenting your technique in a way that the more you're doing, the more you're consolidating, the more you're like defining an identity, or like expanding something. But it's not kind of coming in and going out, and it's belonging to something outside. It's actually going in and down and to the ground, in the way that sedimentation would kind of build up and create forms and things. And she speaks about it like really well, and writes about it really well. And so that's been like a great learning of the last, through doing this, finishing this record, like that's been the great learning in the last few months in that way. um yeah, that's that.
I think it's really interesting. I mean, I think maybe in a lot of ways with spirituality, and also just what is these states of like transcendental music states, it's very easy to try to externalize these things. In a way, it's almost like taking yourself out of the equation to be like, I'm not responsible. Like,
Exactly.
but actually, it's really these like flow states or things like this they are grounding, and they're not coming from nowhere. They're coming from an epic amount of work too, that
Yeah,
brings you to that place where you can transcend too,
yeah,
whether it's spiritual or psychological or musical, whatever, technical.
yeah, yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's not, the idea of like sorry, like you said, like trance, or like trance within all of its positions, like
Yeah.
ritual, so I haven't got the words, but speaking about music that is kind of coming out, music we get into. Yeah, I play loads of it. I can't find the right words, but where we're kind of taking on it, we're on a journey. We're in, like, you know, something that's long form. We lose ourselves in that, and like, I often feel like obviously we're being affected by what's happening, but I often, until recently, have felt, okay, this is something that's happening to me or to everyone else, but actually it's kind of, like you said, that would be then to separate ourselves from the experience. And I feel like we owe ourselves a bit more than that. Like, it's really, you know, if we're not here, it's not happening. And I found that really helpful, like, for myself, as a creative person or as a listener, you know, whatever it is, but being in that experience. And I was always taught, like, you are the vessel through which things happen,
Yeah.
especially in classical music. It's very abusive in that way. And yeah, I'm really trying.
I wonder, so that was like within your music education, you mean? Or like a, yeah.
Yeah, with classical training.
Yeah, right. It's interesting because you are classically trained. Obviously, you're much more than that, but you come from that like classical training background, which is it is much different, a rigid structure. It's very different than like what we have at our school here. Like,
Yeah,
which,
right.
and I am curious how that education affects you now, or like, yeah, I'm always just curious about how that experience is different than what you're doing now. And is it something you had to recover from? Like this kind of vessel, like idea of you as a vessel is a really almost like, I don't want to say derogatory way of treating musicians, but oftentimes I think,
Yeah, it's undermining. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's, I'm sorry.
No, go on.
Yeah, no, I just think it's a really interesting space. And also like coming from that and then being, you know, in a way, this is all a little cliche, but in my experience in the conservatory is like the instrumentalists were often, they'd go to the studio, they'd practice 8 hours a day so they could just play things as perfectly as possible. And
Mhm.
in a way, it was like about, I don't want to say being a bot, but like it was about like really executing somebody else's instructions
Mhm.
versus, you know, you wear
Yeah.
many hats. You personally, like, you're a composer, curator, you do so many different things, and you play other people's music.
Mm-mm.
Um,
Yeah, I know. I also, yeah, I know what you're saying, and exactly that's where I kind of spin around within all of these things, because you're absolutely right. You get trained, and as I carried out all of my training and education was to do 8 or 10 hours practice a day, and it is really about being. I mean, it can easily be about just being a perfectionist. It's not to say it's always like that, of course. I mean, if I'd been smarter when I was younger, I would have not thought like that. But I feel like we are really pushed into that from very early on. It's about just getting things right. And like I had really great teachers who were always, I had a couple of really great teachers who planted the idea in my head early on that it's not about getting it right, but it's about being a musician. And a lot of people don't get that, you know. Like, you could easily just miss out on that fact. Just that, and we're taught to train and, like you said, go into a room and get things right. Um, and it's really important. You have to have the craft. You have to have the technique. Like, you just do have to do that hard graft. So I don't regret really doing it. And I'm very out of shape now. Like, I practice a couple of hours a day max, but I couldn't do like I couldn't do what I used to do when I was in my early 20s, for sure. But things have completely changed. But yeah, like just today uh, I was in a waiting room to get my thing sorted out
oh,
for
your
the
vaccination.
yeah,
Yeah.
my vaccine sorted. And there was a violin teacher next door. Oh, I imagine someone having a violin lesson, probably a child. It sounded like someone who was a beginner, maybe doing studies, you know. And I was like, yeah, of course I remember that. But I was thinking, like they really seem to be enjoying it. They're actually quite good. Like, they seem to be enjoying getting this thing right, and they're reading someone's music and they're just getting it right. And I just imagined like the teacher in the room saying, do it like this, do it like that. You could do this a bit better. And like have taught a bit the cello in the past, but I've never felt comfortable doing things like that. I've always been like, just take the music away. Like, why does someone need to have someone else's musical ideas when we can literally come up with our own?
Mhm.
We literally come up with our own ideas. And like, this might seem really like obvious to people who don't um read music or haven't had that kind of training, that you would like pick up a guitar and like you start playing with it. But that's more normal within like guitar music. Maybe like you're not learning music straight away when you play the guitar most of the time. But I think, sorry, going back to your question, it's like, how do you get rid of like what we've been taught, and what do we keep for ourselves from that training? For me, it's like technique and stuff, or maybe language a bit. But how, like, and this is definitely a Berlin move thing, was like not doing so much of that, playing other people's music stuff, which I still really enjoy doing, for sure, because there's loads of amazing music out there, of course, that I love playing. Like, I love reading and interpreting it. But like being able to have the time now here to like do more of what I would just call improvising as a cellist, like working on material that I feel like is from my own head and from my own creativity. And like it also sounds really obvious, like, oh, you just play, you just make stuff up, or you come up, whatever comes out. But obviously what comes out has been influenced by years and years of like material that's gone in, which could be cool if it's good material. But I've got like tons of muscle memory that I wish I didn't have, like, tons of it. And like I like working with Khayyam. I was playing with CTM Festival this year with Khayyam Alami on his Apotome project, which was
Mhm.
really amazing. But I was improvising in that, and that was all within tuning system that I don't normally work in. So I was completely like off, derailed. I couldn't fall into my muscle memory stuff. Yeah, which is why it was challenging, which is why it was really interesting. But
Yeah. Oh, those
yeah,
things are so hard to break, that muscle memory.
yeah. But I have muscle memory also with my computer, with the way I produce, with all the equipment that I use. I have all my parameters that I understand. I have patches that I understand, and I use them because I know them.
Yeah.
And then the repetition there comes, and the language and identity comes from that. But it's really also a real trap to get used to all the tools.
Absolutely. It goes both ways. Actually, one in my, which class do I do this in? I think it's we approaches to, I teach this class like approaches to modern composition. I think that's the class I do it in, where the first day of school, we do the 10-minute challenge, which is like try to produce a track in 10 minutes, which of course is really hard.
Sounds fun.
And it's a fun one. I've actually never done it to myself. I submit my students to things that I don't do myself, which is not
Bad
really
teacher.
fair.
Bad
Uh,
teacher.
yeah. Uh, but I found what's so interesting about the 10-minute challenge is not like, maybe some good ideas can come out of it, but it's mostly that it shows you what your muscle memory is. What are the like, what is your cruise control? When you don't have time to pick an instrument, what instrument do you pick? When you don't have time to choose effects, or even compositionally, like how you structure a song, when you don't have time to make decisions, you really choose what you know. And that's really interesting because, well, first of all, that can be a trap, that you fall into the same thing again and again. And especially if you're unhappy with your composition, you want to grow, it's important to recognize what your cruise control is, what your muscle memory is, so you can break it. But it's also something to be celebrated, because
Yeah,
that's your sonic identity, your compositional identity is all these weird little things that are very different than what the person next to you is doing.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
so
totally.
great, but bad. Yeah.
Yeah. yeah, but being aware of it, I guess, that's what I mean. If you look back on stuff in 6 years before, and you're like, oh, I've been using the same thing for a really long time. But no, I know
Yeah.
it's a good test, the 10-minute thing. I should try it. I know what my 10-minute test would sound like.
Yeah.
Or,
You already know it?
yeah, I know it'd be the O coast, going probably, and like me playing like a chord on the cello that's like in some nice tuning that's just responding to the O coast. It's just a nice idea. Maybe I'll do that tomorrow. That's
Yeah,
my
maybe I should.
go-to. It's like quick, make music. That's what it is.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I think it's really interesting. Yeah, I have to do it to myself too. It's nice to identify what these things are, just so you're aware of what you're doing. But it's true. Like I sometimes will listen to tracks I made years ago and be like, I'd still totally do that same exact thing,
Yeah,
slightly different. Uh,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
sometimes it's important to break it.
yeah. Do you have stuff you listen to and you think that really sucks? Why did I, what was I thinking?
Like, what was I thinking? Why did I do that?
Or do you have that kind of stuff? Do you have that material that you wish you had never put out?
I I don't put out a lot of stuff. I actually, when I moved to Europe, I also kind of made a cut where I'm like, I'm not going to release recorded music anymore. I'm starting to go back into it, but
Right.
I really wanted it to be in the moment. I like using lots of speakers, lights, all this stuff. So I'm like, I
Right.
want it to be site specific.
Right. Okay, then yeah, interesting. But I meant like also like just work that you've made, or is this
I try not to regret anything. I conceive mistakes, but I don't get, yeah, I don't know if I try to, if I don't know if I regret things that much. Do you regret things?
well, I guess we have maybe a different like professional path, because I've done a lot of work that I maybe just did because it was like the survival of living in London. So
No.
I'm on a ton of records that I would be quite embarrassed about. Um,
Okay.
it's not my music, but then it's like I'm just cellist for hire, so it's a very different thing. But it gets mixed up. Like people look on Discogs and they're like, oh, you played with this person. I'm like, no, I was just hired to play in a string section for the afternoon, but it kind of gets muddled up with all your work.
Oh
Is it?
yeah, I totally understand that. Yeah, I haven't really quite had that experience, but I can imagine. I guess that's also why people like to use monikers and things like that to separate it. Um,
Well,
you know what?
I tried to get a moniker as a recording musician, but no one would really accept it.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
hard because they want you. Yeah.
Well, in those settings, it wasn't really about that. It would be more like just playing for a pop band, And then
Yeah.
I'd say, actually, can you call me like Jessica Rouge or something? And say, well, no, because like, Gamer, the PRS version of Gamer, like they won't allow you to have a fake
Ah,
name. They'd have to do all these kinds of things. I did try it, but it was just too complicated.
okay.
It was Jessica Rouge. That's
Jessica Rouge.
stupid. That's just a terrible name. Sorry.
It's funny. Yeah. Okay, so we do have two questions here. Well, okay, so yeah, there's two questions. I guess the first question is, yeah, hi guys, hope you are well. Love from India, and the resources here are very limiting. What would be your advice for a performer who's starting out in such a scene? This is from Raul Bade, yeah.
In a scene with few resources. Is that
With few resources, yeah.
how, I mean, not having a lot of equipment. I mean, I've made loads of music with very little, but I don't know if this is great advice. but it depends on what your practice is, of course. But I mean, I used to record a lot on my iPhone, or on a, actually I had like a very old Roland. Do you remember these things? It's like what Zoom became, or the kind of Zoom, but it's Roland Eddie Roll.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Actually not too bad, but it was like a kind of cheap. I got a cheap secondhand field recorder, and that was material for like loads of my early stuff. Actually, a lot of it's on Paradise '94, my record, my like first record. But using audio, like using field recordings as a starting point for composition, that's like so quick and relatively cheap thing to do, and it depends what kind of software. Yeah, that's like a very immediate. That's not really obviously being an instrumentalist or like using equipment, but I don't know if that's good advice.
Yeah,
Recording.
well, let's see what maybe they can follow up if they have more specific stuff. But yeah, I agree with you. I also think that there tends to be a myth amongst especially electronic musicians about the necessity of resources. Or I mean, of course you need some resources, but like there's so much like gear porn or whatever. There's so much like fetishization of technology and equipment, and it's really not necessary. It's sometimes debilitating.
I completely agree. Yeah.
And
I mean,
so,
yeah. The only I think having all this stuff, like I have a room with some sound treatment and stuff. It's like it's only like a kind of comfort blanket, you know. I don't think I really needed it. Um, I agree. I agree. Also, yeah, we talked about this bit before, but like hierarchies in tech like software plugins, equipment. I mean, I'm so not interested in what's good and what's not. It's really just like what works and what it sounds like. Like like strongly against like gear stuff. Annoyingly, my boyfriend is into gear from a like in a kind of techie way. So annoyingly, he has some stuff that ends up being talked about quite often. But that's why I have some gear myself. But it's it's a bit, yeah, no, it's like there's a real elitism around it, which is just, you know, if you're into it, then that's fine, that's the interest. But I feel like it's often used as a kind of superiority complex thing, and I think that's really unhelpful when you're being creative.
it locks people out. Just price point. I mean, no matter where in the world you are, it's like if you can't afford that modular synthesizer and you feel like, you need it to make work, and it's just, yeah, it's really not necessary. It's really just, I find with anything around music, and it's really just about just doing again and again and again. And you can do it again and again and again with like a piece of junk you found on the street,
Yeah,
and you can make something just as wonderful.
yeah, yeah. And resources, if that means like studios, I mean, not necessary. Or spaces. I mean, okay,
Or
of course it
spaces
all
too, yeah,
helps.
maybe.
Of course it all helps, but yeah, not having a lot of, I don't know if Raoul says any more about what he means by resources, but I think we probably both feel like you can make a lot from not very much, but I understand a lot of people would rather just get a lot of expensive gear and work in that way, which that's just another way of working if you have the cash to do that.
I wonder also, like, yeah, because I don't understand exactly what the resources is, but like, one of the things, like, seeing how you work is also like that you do have so many hats, that you're doing so many different things. And that's also something that I suggest to people who also don't feel like they have the resources, they have the community, they have spaces for it. It's like, if you build it, they will come. Like, I know it's cheesy, but it's like, you have to create things yourself when it doesn't exist. And people will want things like that. And when I lived in New York, when I was in college, I wanted a record label. I wanted an artist collective. So we did it. When I moved to New York, we wanted a space. So we thought there wasn't a good noise venue in New York at the time. And we just made our own space. We
Yeah.
didn't have money. It's just a matter of doing and pretend, like kind of like faking it. And it becomes real. Like,
100%. Yeah, exactly. And that's how I started that series I did at Cafe Arto Kameklang, for exactly the same reason. Like there was no, at the time, there were not many people, well, not anyone I can really remember in London at least, doing like what you call contemporary, like modern classical music, contemporary music, or like, yeah, music played by classical instruments that's made recently, let's put it like that, contemporary repertoire and electronic music in a like, not, well, okay, forget electronic music, but like playing maybe even playing like Steve Reich, something kind of popular in the modern classical realm. There wasn't a space in London where you could do that in a casual way. Like I was like, well, I'm not going to wait to be invited by the Royal Festival Hall. That's not going to happen. Like we need a space where like young people can experiment actually with this music, and 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 a place where improvisation and contemporary music and electronic music can like all be on one stage. And at that time it really didn't exist. It's like 2008. There were not many examples of places doing that on like on a small, like on a DIY level. So we just created it, and it became really popular and really shaped the landscape of the musical landscape of the city. I really believed that. And people kept coming, and we did maybe eight a year for 11 years. And it's,
wow.
and it like, it's exactly that. It's like through doing and just getting up and faking it a lot of the time, making lots of mistakes, annoying people, falling out with people, making new friendships, creating a community. You know, as long as there's no money, things when money's, if it's better when there's no cash involved. You know, as soon as we started to get funding, it all then got a bit complicated. The DIY thing is great for a reason. Like you have to do it because you love it. Yeah. And that's
When
like
it's a labor of love or whatever, it's like it just changes things. It's worth putting in a ton of hours for no pay because you want to do it, and then money can always complicate things, you know.
Yeah.
Of course, it's nice to be able to pay your rent, but it's
Well,
important.
I mean, I feel for sure. But I feel like having done a lot of that DIY work, which was a lot, you build context and communities and experience, and that then feeds into your profession, if you want to call it that, for sure. There's never really a loss. I mean, I made a lot of losses.
Yeah.
I feel like it's I've made up for it. It's come back in other ways. And community is really like the most important part of it, you know.
100%.
It's like you don't get paid to build communities. You shouldn't. So it's like, I feel like there's a lot of value in that.
And it often leads to, I don't know, some of the shows that I've played, there were someone's like, oh, you know, we don't really have money. Would you come play for free? I go play for free. Maybe there's not even many people there. Sometimes like somebody's there that gets me a really high paying gig like the next year. You just saying yes and being eager and just doing leads to things.
Yeah, exactly. It's just making, not like not networking in that way. It's more creating more possibilities with each other, and then you can all, it's like a kind of resource sharing as well. You can all share and give and take from, or like not give and take, but do something for someone at some point. You know, I often pay for play for no money. Often happening. You know, I don't do it just for the fees, but then there's other situations where like it's a big festival, and then you should be really demanding of what you're giving the festival. It just depends on the situation completely.
Absolutely. And networking always has a bad connotation. It feels sleazy or something like that, but really networking is making community. And you know, when you release a record and you want to send out, you want like somebody to review it, you know, they need you, you need them, because you're doing what you love, they're doing writing about music, that's what they love. So you kind of need each other, and connecting, you're not always asking for a favor, you're connecting and creating relationships with people.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
it's
more is more. It's just more is more.
yeah.
Really. And I really love connecting people, so I'm a bit addicted to like the whole like, you got to meet this person, and you're a cellist. You should. Of course, we've got. I mean, we've literally got loads in common. Like so much in common. We've even though we don't know each other, like we're gonna be able to connect on in so many ways. For example, yeah, I'm a
Being a
cellist
musician is
myself,
great.
kind of
It-
person.
yeah. Then maybe that's a good into the next question, which is kind of related. Um, yeah, it's related. And okay, it seems that sharing resources and creative exchange is important to your work as a way of operating outside of an institutional context. What Berlin groups or initiatives are you involved in? This is from Abigail.
She asking me.
I think so. Yeah, yeah, I assume so. I'll let you answer it.
Yeah. Well, no, but maybe she's asking you. Or
But
how do you think?
I think it's, well, we can both answer. It doesn't specify, so I say we both answer it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to steal your thunder.
No, no, no. If it's a student, they know me already. It's like they hear me talk all day.
The question was, what initiatives am I involved with in Berlin?
Yeah,
Yeah,
resources and creative exchange is important to your work as a way of operating outside of an institutional context. What Berlin groups or initiatives are you involved in?
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Okay, well, actually, Amplify is a great example of this.
yeah,
Exactly, bringing it back to Amplify as one example. So the idea is that resources are shared there in a way, like it's like maybe often the case is it's like a sharing of knowledge, of course, as we do anyway with each other, but with equipment as well, and with the studio space. And then like the idea is that there's a community that with everyone who's been through that program, you kind of stay in touch, and we help each other out. Like there's like a label, there's like a print, there's like a pressing plant in Berlin that does very small runs of vinyl copies of, they do like small runs of vinyl, like they'll press like a small amount, which is a more affordable and like easier and more manageable way of doing things if you don't have like a label to pay for these kinds of things, which is the case for loads and loads of people in the city or
yeah,
everywhere. So like sharing these kinds of contexts where we can um if, where so they can have and get some of their work pressed to vinyl, which is like, it's a nice thing to do. It can be important. It's like a great thing to be able to put your work in a format that you feel is special, just to kind of consolidate what you've been doing, like sharing those kinds of contexts. But then like and Amplify is all about community really, because like we're just like working on a kind of not a teacher student level, but more on a flat kind of structure. And the way that the Amplify operates as well is within the office. It's also this kind of, we're all in it together kind of thing, which is like a great example of ways that are very unlike institutional trainings that I've experienced. Then I play with an ensemble in Berlin called the Harmonic Space Orchestra, which does sound quite esoteric, but it's not exactly. It comes from terminology used by James Tenney, an American composer working in what he calls harmonic space, but it's like to do with tuning systems. Just intonation is like commonly a part of what we're doing. Just intonation, as in a tuning system, and that's a community of a sort. It's of in some way like we're all working together to like, well, there's 12 people and we all work like managing the group, and it's like a very big band where we all do menial tasks a lot of the time, but for the greater idea that we'll be working together in a kind of research based way, rehearsing this music is not really about reading notation, although we do sometimes, but it's like an experiential way of learning, because it's about it's a listening practice as much as it is a playing practice. You have to learn by ear a lot of the phenomena that we're talking about. And that literally needs time and community support in a way. Like, some people are further ahead than others in this group, so it's like we have to play in a way where we support each other. It's a bit hard to explain, but it wouldn't really work if there was some person, like in a jazz quartet, where the sax player is doing a solo all the time, or the drummer is being obnoxious. It's like, it doesn't, those kind of hierarchies don't really work in this kind of music, because we have to be we're tuning to each other. We have to be in some kind of fusion at points. It's not always, but like, there's a kind of aim to be we just have to work very much like in a way where we're like truly listening to each other as players, and that is trying to be translated into the way in which we operate as a group, organizing, but also socially. And so in a way, it's like a strange community which is led by the practice, like led by the music and the demands that the music has of the players, which is very unlike a lot of virtuosic stuff that we would otherwise do. That's one thing. But otherwise, I mean, community in Berlin, I feel it's a bit more like, yeah, we talked about it, but it's a different kind of community. And I feel like the kind of what I'm talking about with community here is maybe more on a like personal level. Oh, not planning gigs and events kind of in that kind of way.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, but I think that's good. I mean, that's already a couple organizations and things like that. And the Amplify is also just a really interesting one.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the city's full of initiatives, like I've realized, social justice groups, which is not necessarily about music a lot of the time, but this is the like the attitude here is way more progressive, and from what I can tell when it comes to activism and politics, and that's a big shift for me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess one of the just thinking about other, like, in terms of places that I am involved in or know. I have if you're familiar, there's this. Do you know Kashmir Radio?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I've not worked with them, but I know who they are.
Yeah, this is a great online radio station in Berlin. It's self-run. It's an amazing radio station. I think they're looking for a new space at the moment. I run a series. I mentioned earlier this thing called Sound Portraits, where we choose a different artist every month and we focus on their work. So I run that there, and that space is great. They also have workshops. I've also taught some workshops there. The Sound Portrait series that I'm doing, I'm actually expanding it. It's usually like a free event or donation based when it's in person, when it's not on the radio. And I'm going to start doing it at the space called KM28, which I assume you know KM28.
Yeah, that's another kind of community, and well, very much a community. Yeah, and I'm very involved with what they're doing when they're open.
Yeah, when they're open, one day. KM28 is a really interesting space. So I'll be doing these things there again, maybe starting in July, but they have a lot of just interesting concerts and events and installations.
Yeah, of course. I forgot to mention KM28 earlier. I mean, in terms of like the Berlin Roulette or Berlin Cafe Otto, I guess KM28 is one of these spaces, of course. Yeah, it's just been shut for so long. I kind of forget about these places.
I know this question in general. I'm like, I don't know. What is the world like? What is Berlin like? I feel like this room is most of what I've seen for the last year.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
There is, of course, there's loads going on. The community and the music scene, like, it's interesting because actually it's been like really needed through this whole pandemic, but obviously we've been unable to create community, and so there's that real like challenge of like we don't have each other physically, but we really need community, but we physically can't do it. And maybe before I didn't realize how important community was here, but now I realize it's essential, as it probably is for everyone. And but we still can't really make it happen. So I wish I had more examples of communities I'm involved with than what I've just explained. But I think as soon as things get normal, it will be, I hope, a lot more active in that way.
I feel like also a lot of new places are going to start. I feel like the
Yeah.
cultural scene after Corona, I mean, just who knows what things are left open, what,
Yeah.
who knows, things will be different. Yeah, I used to be really involved in this space called Spectrum,
Oh, I remember.
which
Has
is a
that,
great space.
I mean, would it still be open?
It's closed. Yeah, they closed down. They had some issues with one of the founders, and
Oh,
it was a bad situation.
you mean the
But
place down in it's by Schönlandstrasse?
yeah, exactly. And it was great because it was about music, technology, education, art. Like they were doing tons of workshops, and it was a great space. Some of the communities that were active there are still active around Berlin. So I know a bunch of different communities there, like audiovisual performance or modular synthesizers or maker lab stuff.
Yeah.
But there's not a central location for those communities anymore.
Yeah. And that was a good space. I saw quite a few shows there actually. They always had that noise issue.
Always that neighbor upstairs who hated music. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Community. I just feel like as soon as we're out of this, it's like it's going to be very easy just to get. I mean, not very easy, but I could imagine just like going on tour and like having this like weird airport life again. But I feel more like it's important to stay around so that it kind of these very essential relationships, whether it's like personal or within music, like they actually have space, like regular space to grow. Otherwise, this does become a city where you have these kind of friends on the outskirts and musicians that you play with whenever you're in town, but it like never becomes very deep. And that really is for me like that's why this like if I think about this record in Iceland, like that's literally like years and years of playing with the same people, and that's for me anyway. That's like I didn't really think about that until I was looking back on that time, but that's like for me the most important collaborations I have are these long ones where you're like maybe at the time we like find each other annoying or not on the same page creatively, but like after 10 years you've really grown together, and that's the difference between that and like collaborating with like 100 people a year and having these very kind of quick relationships, which is also fun and like good, but yeah.
It'd be interesting. Yeah, I totally agree with you on so many of these things. I think it'll be really interesting to see after this Corona situation is finally over, like, yeah, maybe some of these things that we're learning from being at home all the time, of having just our close relationships, like how that will carry on into the future.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
So I see we're at about an hour and a half now. So it's probably a good time to close down unless there are any other questions. I think that's it at the moment. Yeah, this has been super nice.
Has been nice.
Yeah, I didn't know if we'd go for an hour and a half. It's an hour and a half sounded like a long time, but it went by quickly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I hope it wasn't boring for your catalyst.
Who knows? It's all online anyways. You can't really tell. No, I'm sure this is we're also looking at it from a perspective of being old and being used to some of these things. But it's like, a lot of the students here are really just diving off into the world.
Mhm.
And a lot of them are entering different worlds than us, but a lot of them are entering the same kind of world that you're in or that I'm in. And,
Yeah.
regardless, we have information and, whatever, it's experience, and
Yeah.
hopefully it can be valuable to some people.
Yeah. I wish I wish I'd had like things like Amplify and Catalyst when I was studying and stuff. Just didn't have it at all. So um
I'm
just
totally with you. Yeah.
yeah. And then like in somewhere like London, you just have to dive in, and you're gonna take just whatever comes at you, and it's a bit like, yeah, you get shaped by the city in a way. When you're not really taught to have your own ideas and your own language and identity. So yeah, sounds like, yeah.
Well, you came out okay, so it's probably fine.
Oh, thanks. It took me a long time. No, I'm kidding. I don't know, me 10 years ago was a very different thing. I was like Londoner,
Yeah.
dressing up, putting black clothes on for a concert.
Yeah.
Well, I was still wearing black clothes. Actually, that hasn't changed, but I don't put them on to do an event in the evening. I just wear them all day now.
Yeah. You live the black clothes. I'm from California. I like colors.
Yeah, your shirt. You're doing all right with your shirt.
I'm California at heart forever.
Oh, thanks. It's been nice to chat.
Absolutely.
Nice to reflect on these things.
Yeah, it's really nice. And yeah, it's nice to get to know you. Nice to meet you. I hope to see you in the real world. I'm sure we'll see each other in the real world sometime
Real
soon.
world. Let's do it.
Absolutely.
Nice.
Cool. Nice to see you. And yeah, goodbye, digital world. We'll see you next time.
Goodbye, digital world. Thanks for listening.
Goodbye, digital world. I hope one day.
Okay, you're going to press the stop button.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to press the stop.